straight into it. So
Okay.
got it.
Perfect.
This is where Simon Hodgson steps in again and then says, "This is going to go live." Go on, do it, because we are live. Good evening, everyone. My name is Simon Misiewicz from Optimised Accountants. Welcome and good evening to the Property Experts panel. This is where all the panel members will be speaking to you live this evening, Monday, the 4th of April. I'm glad I got that date right, because the social media post I nearly put out had the wrong date on it. So here we are, the 4th of April. I'll say it again just so I can show off. So what I'm going to do is go around the panel members and we'll all introduce one another to you. But what I would like to remind you of is this is live, and please, please, please do post your questions as soon as you can in order for us to try and guarantee that we will answer those questions for you. You'll notice I just use the word contradictory words, try and then guarantee. I should be a lawyer. Right, moving on. So let's just go into the slides. So here we are, the 4th of April. Now, what I want to remind you all of is below this video, if you're watching on YouTube, that's great. You will see the video description of this property checklist, and you can download this for free. It will enable you to understand what you need to do before you buy a property, whilst you're refurbing a property, and whilst you're then getting all that lovely rental income from that property, and how to maximize your revenue whilst reducing tax, of course. So make sure you download that. If you're watching on other social media channels such as Facebook and LinkedIn, please go over to YouTube, get into the video description and download that link. That's where you are going to get it firsthand. So I am Simon Misiewicz from the Property Expert panel, but also Optimised Accountants. I focus on UK and US tax, and I focus pretty much on property, whether that's in the UK or indeed the United States. So give me a shout if you have any questions regards to that. Bronwen's asked me to remind you all as well that we have another show, and we'll talk about that little later on, talk about SAS pensions. So I shall mention that later on, and specific dates and times. Without further ado, let's have Teresa introduce herself and any things that you need to watch out for in the next few weeks.
I think what we need to watch out for is Simon perhaps bringing up his dirty laundry, which he did raise at the last webinar. So you'd have to watch that last webinar to find out what I mean. So he's very unpredictable. Who knows what could be raised. But yes, hello, good evening, everyone. I'm Teresa Kaczmarek. I'm here representing the National Residential Landlord Association. Our association is in place to support landlords in every aspect of the rental sector. And also importantly, we're here to represent our members in government as well. So what I would say is that the larger our organisation, the more influential that we are and could be. So even if you're not a landlord, by joining the association, you're helping to support us in shaping policy and potentially in making improvements as well to the sector. But yes, I'm here to answer any questions this evening to do with landlording, and don't forget that you can get a discount on NRLA membership if you just have to basically look at the link in the description. Okay, thank you. I'll move you back to Simon.
Over to Tim.
Thank you, Simon. I'm Tim.Bishop from Bishop. I own Bishop, which is a law firm with about 65 staff. Within that, about 22 of them deal with property, and within that, I've got a specialist team of property investors, because I think property investors need a different approach to conveyancing to other people. And also, we have a highly specialist leasehold team of 5, soon to be 6, possibly the most specialist and largest team of its type in the country, doing nothing but lease extension and franchisement or right to manage. And as an investor and developer myself, I've got experience in commercial conversions, SA, HMO. I'm currently buying an office almost at the completion of putting it into a family SAS, a pension, and I'm also buying 11-bed B&B to convert to an apart hotel. And that's me. But what I'm going to do for the rest of my few seconds, I thought I'd bring up something that I always used to do when I did a live event. So a solicitor's joke. We've got a huge number of them on our website. So here we go. The NHS has announced that they will no longer be using rats for medical experiments. In their place, they're going to be using solicitors, and they're given 3 reasons for this. Number 1, there are now more solicitors than rats. Number 2, the medical researchers didn't become as emotionally attached to the solicitors as they did to the rats. And lastly, no matter how hard you try, there is simply nothing that a solicitor won't do. There we go. Thank you. Over to Bronwen.
Let's go over to Ross.
Yeah, cut me out already. Hi everybody, I'm Ross. I'm here to answer your building questions. In the day job, I run a maintenance refurbishment company. I've been in construction for sort of 35 years. I'm an HMO landlord. I'm a small landlord as well with other rental properties. I invest with my SaaS. I invest with other people's money. So I'm happy to take some of those questions as well. But hopefully tonight you'll give me some really good questions to answer, and we can get some more of those nuggets of gold out. Anybody who was here last month will know what that means.
Mr. H.
Brilliant, Ross. Well shoehorned in there. I like that. Another nugget of gold about the nugget of gold. Awesome. Yes, I'm here tonight to answer any questions about your investment funding. So my company is funded. We've been arranging funding and finance for investors for a good number of years, and I've been investing in property for over 20. Yeah, very quickly realized as I started the journey that most brokers don't really understand investors, and an investor needs a specialist broker to understand the strategies they're doing. Yeah, so buy-to-let, bridging, refurbishment, etc. Please send your questions in live and we will get those answered on the air.
Finally, over to Bronwen.
And last but not least, so I'm Bronwen Vearncombe. These are all my experts. I am thrilled that we've been able to continue this fantastic event. And I'm an investor in Hampshire, down in sunny Hampshire. I have HMOs. I've been an investor for 8 years, houses of multiple occupation, single lets, holiday lets, guest houses, so serviced accommodation, developments, and I am a SaaS trustee for my own pension as well. So with all of that, I love to teach and help other people learn with that experience. So that's really why I'm here today, because I think all of us in this group, not only are we all investors, but we're passionate about our expertise and we love to share. And I think those of you that follow us regularly know that this is not about marketing. This is about sharing and helping other people. So let's crack on with those questions, because we've got another record month this month with the number of questions we've had in advance. And I think we've probably got over 130 people maybe even on this live event. So welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. Let's start with those questions.
Indeed. Thank you ever so much for that. And we'll start with a question. As we are live, please do chip in with your questions. We will try and get those there. There is a couple of people already asking about how do I get started in property? Bronwen Vearncombe has got a great online product which will help you to understand what property investing really is to begin with, and how you can start your journey with confidence and comfort. So there is a link below the video description, so make sure you go into that straight away. And Bronwen has provided with the first session for free. So there's an hour-long program. I've watched it many times. I always push my clients that way as well. So if you are new to this program, make sure that you go into Bronwen's course and get ahead. But I'm going to start with a question. So Charlotte has asked a question. We're in the process of inquiring with a solicitor, etc., in relation to the reliefs and renewal on one of our buy-to-lets. We have 84 years remaining on the lease. We have heard that a change in the law coming this year in relation to lease extensions, which will make the process cheaper and fairer to leaseholders. Does the panel think we should wait until these changes come to the law and in effect, bearing in mind that the longer we wait, the more expensive it is for us? And there's only one person to answer that question, but he's not here. So we'll have to wait until Tim can chip in instead. So Tim, over to you.
It's always nice to be someone's reserve. Yes, thanks for that. Right, the interesting news is actually we've had some breaking news actually on Friday, and this isn't commonly known because the government haven't actually publicly announced it. I checked today, it's still not on their website, nobody else seems to know. But they gave they tipped the nod to a group I'm a member of, basically a group of specialist lease extension solicitors and surveyors. And they've told us that in fact the new legislation which has gone through and had royal assent will come in on the 30th of June. So although it's not common knowledge, it will come in on the 30th of June. However, although the government have been talking about loads of possible changes, and Boris does like bigging himself up and saying how much he's going to give to everybody, actually the changes at this stage are very small. So about 18 months ago, the Law Commission reported there was something like 300 suggestions on lease extension, 300 on freehold purchase, 300 on right to manage. But actually it's come down at this stage to a very small number. There may be more, but that's uncertain. So what is coming in now? It's a ground rent ban, but the ground rent ban only applies for new leases. So in other words, if you've got an existing lease, apart from one exception, it doesn't apply to you. It does apply, for example, if you're building a new property and granting a lease, so it'll cover you there, but also it applies for title splitting. When I think title splitting, it's what the property investor community refer to title splitting, not technically title splitting. You've got a freehold building, you create some sub-leases and sell those off. That is creating a new lease, so it'll be caught by the ban. So that means after the 30th of June, you will not be able to charge ground rent. That has no direct effect on existing ground rents. The only exception is if you're seen to re-grant a lease. So, two types of lease extension. There's a statutory or formal lease extension. At the moment, you can get 90 years, and there's a statutory procedure, a reform procedure you've got to go through, and you already have no ground rent at the end. Actually, it's called a peppercorn rent, effectively nil rent. So that makes no difference. The difference will be with a voluntary lease extension. If in the process you're creating a new lease effectively, then you may have a zero ground rent, but more likely what will happen, you'll get an extra number of years tacked on the end, in which case the ground rent only stops at the end of the existing lease. A bit complicated, but in other words, if you've got, say, 60 years left and you negotiate informally for another 60 years, you'll have ground rent for 60 years, but at 60 years it'll stop, and the remaining 60 years you won't have ground rent. There are also changes for retirement properties. They don't come into next year, and there's slight changes for shared ownership properties. But apart from that, that's the only real definite news. Other stuff the government have talked about. They've talked about making it cheaper for lease extensions. They're talking about getting rid of marriage value, which is an additional payment that kicks in the day your lease gets under 80. But there's no certainty, there's no detail on that at all. At the moment, all we know for sure, yes, there's going to be a ground rent change. Yes, it's coming in on the 30th of June. The only other thing to bear in mind, if you are thinking of selling a property with a new lease, if you've exchanged for the 30th of June, you're allowed to have a ground rent. If you it'll hang over. So that's it, basically. With regard to the question about whether it's a good idea to go for a lease extension now, it's a gamble, and I can't give you a direct answer. Number one, the shorter your lease gets, a lease extension price goes up. Number two, the more your property is worth, and property prices are continuing to rise in general, the more you're going to be paying for a leasehold premium. On the other hand, there is possibility that some of the government's generous suggestions may come into effect. I don't know. It's uncertain. You've got definitely prices going up, definitely a term coming down against the possibility of cheaper lease extensions. I can't say one way or another. One way to do it, you could wait a year or so and then decide then. By the nearer the end of this parliament, we should know if the government are going to bring it in or not. So that might be one way, but it might cost you a little bit more in the short term, but it's a gamble.
Just on that, Tim, are you expecting a glut of people trying to get in the lease extensions once this come on board, and will freeholders try and hold it back if they are thinking that there may be a loss to them?
Possibly. I think it remains to be seen, but I think a lot of freeholders won't be very keen on voluntary lease extensions. They'll simply make you go through the statutory route, which gives you a no ground rent anyway. So I suspect that'll probably be the route. The other interesting thing that will have an impact on not so much leaseholders, but on freeholders, developers and people who are getting title splits is what they'll do with a freehold. Until recently, the freehold has been quite valuable. I know at the peak, I know one guy who was managing to get prices for a freehold roughly 35 times ground rent. So if you had, say, 6 flats, 250 quid a time, it's a substantial sum. But now, with the changes, any new freehold, what's it going to be worth? It may even be seen as a liability. There may be certain advantages. You might be able to extend the property, you might be able to build on the roof, etc. But the guaranteed money, the ground rent, will be going out, and it won't be available. And the last thing is, some people have thought, well, are the government going to wipe out ground rents entirely? The answer is almost certainly no, for one big reason. Firstly, retrospective legislation is always a mistake and governments don't like it. In other words, changing things, it'll ruin some businesses because there are some freehold businesses. But critically, pension companies have invested hugely in ground rents, because ground rents were probably the best, most guaranteed, simplest form of income you could get. You knew for, say, another 100 years exactly what you'd be getting when the increase comes in, and it was guaranteed. And so therefore pension companies invested hugely in ground rents. So I don't think the government are going to be very keen about abolishing ground rent going back, because suddenly all these pension companies will lose shed loads of money. And that may not worry people, except that it's the pension holders who will be losing out. And suddenly pension holders will be losing a big chunk of their pension. So I can't see any government wanting to attack pension holders. It's given that old people vote more than young people, it will be an absolute political calamity. So therefore I don't think that's going to happen.
Interesting. I think we've probably done leases now, haven't we?
I'll shut up.
All right, you go have your dinner. No, I'm joking. Okay.
Happy for me to ask the next question then. All right, Tim's not allowed to answer it. So Ruth has asked a question. Is it possible to occupy a property you own, which is mortgaged buy-to-let, even temporarily? Is permission possible on a standard buy-to-let mortgage or any other way? I've not yet purchased the property yet. Simon, over to you on that one.
The short answer is no. The T's and C's of your mortgage, your buy-to-let mortgage, will say that you are not allowed to occupy it for any length of time. And permission is almost certainly not going to be given by the lender. The reason is, and I'll try and make my answer not quite as long as Tim's, but as we went through the credit crunch all those years ago, we used to have lots of self-certified mortgages. I used to call them lie-to-buy mortgages. Effectively, you could just say your income was whatever it was. The change after the credit crunch was that you then could only get a residential mortgage with affordability. You had to demonstrate you could service that mortgage. And then on the back of that, people would then try and get a buy-to-let mortgage on a house that they couldn't afford on a residential mortgage. And so became the backdoor residential mortgage, with which Prudential Regulation Authority went on to release more criteria to say that you could not now rent a buy-to-let to yourself or a family member.
Perfect. There you go. Good answer. Good answer. Here's one for Tim. It says here, one of our properties was sold in 2017. The land registry is still registered as the owners. So even though they've sold it, it looks like they have still got named on the land registry, which is surely that's wrong. A utility company touting for our business told us that this was the case. What might this mean to us and the owner? So Tim, I mean, surely if you're doing an exchange completion, your name should be taken off the land registry.
Yes, absolutely. It should have happened. It sounds like a mistake's taken place. Mistakes do happen. And I think probably this is more likely to happen than some, because you know you're going to complete, your solicitor's not going to forget to complete. But something like this seems a bit like admin afterwards, though it's not. So I think number one is double check on the land registry, because sometimes it may be that the utility company is simply trying it on. I've known them do all sorts of weird and wonderful things. I'll speak to the libel lawyers later. But if not, I would say get in contact with whoever was the vendor, because their solicitors clearly should have done it. So it's not a major problem. It should be able to be sorted, but I don't see why you should do it, really. And actually, technically, actually your solicitors should have done it. So contact your solicitors who should have registered you with on the land registry. So it should be relatively formal. Might take a while. The land registry is unbelievably slow, but get in contact with your solicitors. They were paid to do it. They forgot. At the moment, no one's lost. It's not a great disaster, but it needs to be sorted.
Bronwen?
So I know a little bit about this one, and the person buying the property was the solicitor. She didn't need a mortgage. She bought it in cash. So it didn't go through the normal process that it would do, where the mortgage company says, oh, you've got to see that, make sure you're on the title deeds. And so, what this person is saying is, well, if I'm still on the title deeds, I still own it. But that's not the case, is it?
No, absolutely not. No, this is, I wouldn't say it's a formality, it's not, but there's clearly, if there's a clearly money being exchanged, a transaction has taken place, a contract has taken place, this is simply that land registry records haven't been updated. So I'm afraid you can't simply say, no, you're not on the land registry, I own the property. No, can't be done. It's simply a record of a transaction. The transaction has taken place.
Okay. I'm going to go to, what I'm going to try and do is mix up the questions. So I'm going to go to one of the questions that have been asked pre-live, and I'm going to then go to a live question. So we'll mix it up tonight. Rob has asked a question: what sorts of referencing checks are needed? With potential recession, I want to know that the tenants are good for the money, basically. For you, from your side, Teresa, what's the best way that you can do your due diligence on a tenant before you allow them into your property?
Right, yeah, this is really important that we do referencing, and we're not ever pressurized into, feeling sorry for somebody and just letting them in the property without doing full checks. I mean, it depends if you've got your agent managing it for you, then, they'll be using tenant referencing services. So they'll be doing, the full credit check, checking on the employers, bank details and what have you. But the NRLA also offer that service. If you're managing it yourself, you can use the NRLA service to do that check, so that you will get a report at the end of that, which will show any county court judgments. It'll give any advice as to if you were to proceed with this tenant, then perhaps you would need a guarantor, or yes, it's okay to go ahead, or no, this tenant's not suitable. But I would add that it's good to do additional checks as well. So an agent will just do their prescribed check and lightly leave it at that. But I'm managing property myself. I'll basically do further checks. So going above and beyond, because once you've got a tenant in your property, anything could happen. Circumstances change, and you could be stuck with a tenant who you can't get out your property very easily. So it's really important you get the right tenant at the early stage. So I would do internet search, checking social media. I would basically meet the tenant face to face. If you can actually even go to where they're currently living as well, so you'll be able to see how their current how they currently live, especially if they're bringing pets along. You'll be able to see, how they manage a property with the pets. Basically just try and get as much information from them as possible at that outset. So I suppose it depends. If you're using an agent, you're maybe not going to get all of that data, but if you're managing it yourself, just dig a bit deeper and just get as much as possible. And don't be embarrassed to ask questions either.
I mean, one thing I would stress here is that what Teresa's not saying is that you should stand outside their current property with a rain mac and a camera and stand there for hours, because that will come across totally wrong. So just be careful of that, or go on Facebook and LinkedIn, start commenting on their posts, because that will also just scare them off, and you'll probably never rent out your property.
You're just very worrying, you are, Simon.
I know. I worry myself. Very worried. So am I.
You can tell he doesn't manage his own properties, don't you?
Yeah.
I mean, while we're talking about tenants, I mean, I'm amazed how many people do manage their own properties, which, I think first of all, they start out and go, well, I might as well do it. And it's a good way to learn. But to be honest, look at the experts we've got in this room. How many people really want to be expert at drawing up a contract for a tenant? And not many, I would hasten to add. So I don't think I've met any of my tenants ever in any of my properties. So, that's my advice. But hey, people sometimes are brilliant at it and they love it. So no problem at all if you want to do it yourself.
You've got a difference there, haven't you, Bronwen? You've got your staff who's a bit more standoffish, and you've got a bit more of a stalker like Teresa.
Yeah.
Let's move on from that. Yeah, I'm going to mix up the questions here, because there's Ben who's asked a question, and there's N Secret as well who's asked a question. There's two connections here. So N Secret, I'm going to get your question in, which says, when doing a buy-to-let refurb, can you get tax relief on repairs? So that's your question. And then I'm going to hop over to Ben's question, who says, a tenant of 10 years are moving out of one of my property. It needs a refurb. So you can see the connection, okay? So here Ben says, before we let it again, but just wondering, what is better for, is it better for carpets or wood? And I'm thinking they are talking about flooring here rather than anything else, just before we get some odd questions or comments. Ross, over to you first, because I'm going to come in from a tax angle later on. But what is better, wood or carpet?
Oh, personal preference and the type of property. But personally, I would always go for laminate wood flooring through hallways, maybe in the social rooms with a rug, and then all the bedrooms carpeted. Depending on the type of tenants you're going for. If you're going for professionals, they're going to want the feel of a carpet. Personally, I wouldn't want to wake up in the middle of the night and get up on a cold wooden floor, and they won't want to either. So yeah, I'd go for laminate through the sort of core areas. Definitely never laminate in a bathroom. Definitely never have wooden skirting boards or MDF skirting boards in a bathroom. Take them off, they'll just rot.
Why is that, Ross? Let's just broaden that out for us. Paint us a picture, why not?
Wood is a natural material that absorbs moisture, and when it absorbs it, it expands. You do not want that in your bathroom, because when it expands, it cracks the paint off, it looks horrible, it doesn't last long, and eventually it absorbs so much water that it starts to fall apart. Personally, I always use like a little plastic skirting board, which is like a window trim. If you have double glazed windows fitted, you can use a 6-inch or a 4-inch piece of that plastic trim as a skirting board. It's plastic, it will never rot. Silicone it in, you can make a reasonable job of it. Or, even better, tile the lot. So yeah.
I'm not sure what's going through Bronwen's mind, by the way. She's smirking when you mentioned inches, but we'll move on from that. Bronwen, did you have anything more to add on that one?
No, I was just thinking nuggets of gold. Amazing.
Nuggets of gold, that's true. Yeah, hashtag nuggets of gold. I have put that throughout our chat function, so please be aware of that. Why is this interesting from a tax angle? Is simply because there are 3 words I think you should all write down. They are repair, replace, renew. So whenever you're buying a property that typically is going to be below market value, you will want to do some sort of replacements of a kitchen or a bathroom suite. And if you do that type of replacement, it's 100% tax allowable to offset against your rental income. Repairs, again, if you are ripping up something to just repair it, kitchen cabinetry as an example, or roof tiles, again, 100% tax allowable. So the cost of those repairs will act as a cost and reduces your profit, therefore reduces your tax liability. And finally, you have as well is renewals. So renewals for me is paintwork. If you're making a property look nice with nice shades of different colors, then that will all be renewals, and you can reduce your tax liability from that as well. So hopefully that answers that question as well. If you've got other, some of the costs that you won't be allowed to offset against your taxable income is where you're converting a single let property into a HMO, as for example. So you're converting a small kitchen and you're moving it into the garden, so extending the property. That will not be like for like replacement, and therefore you will not get the tax relief because it's increasing the value of the property. Therefore, it's going to be capital in nature. We've put a brand new calculator, online calculator, funny enough, which I'll put in this link, all about allowable costs and will it be revenue or will it be capital. So I'll put a link on there and feel free to use that. It's a free online tax calculator. Ross, you had a question.
No, just a quick one to add. Is it worth mentioning the VAT and the reduced VAT if you're buying or renovating a property that's over 2 years or has been empty for over 2 years? I'll let you answer the question, Simon, but it's just worth raising, I think.
Yeah, no, it's a very, very good point. So typically you would pay 20% VAT on any items that you buy, material as well as labor. But if your tradesperson so happens to buy and fix the items, then there are ways of reducing VAT from 20% down to 5%, if not 0%. And typically they will be whereby your property has been empty for 2 years or more, you're converting a commercial property to residential, or you're actually creating a HMO, a licensed HMO. There are ways of having a single let property being increased in mass to a licensed HMO, and you can get the reduction in VAT in that as well. So yeah, absolutely, great point there, Ross. And it's got to go down, Ross, as another nuggets of gold, surely, on that. So that's brilliant to see. Let's move on for another good question that we have, which is Sean. Sean said, hello, afternoon, everyone. I had a quick question about insurance. I'm looking to complete an exchange contract this week, my first rental investment property. go short. So it needs a few weeks of work doing to it, new kitchen, floor, paint, etc. So don't forget the repair, replace, renewals, because it will help you reduce your tax liability. I'm looking at it to get it insured. Initial estimates are £850 per year. The question now I've got is this: does it make more sense for me to have the building insurance so that I can exchange and complete, and then closer to my final works, look for the tenants to then get the landlord's insurance? The reason being is that I have had an estimate, my landlord's insurance would come down to 450 once I have someone living in the property. I mean, from my point of view, I would always insure the building as soon as you own it, just in case something should go wrong with it. If it burns down and you haven't got insurance, then you're up in smoke, pardon the pun. But anyone else with any viewpoints? I mean, Teresa, Ross, Tim, even on that viewpoint, and even Simon, don't you have to get your property insured for mortgage purposes? So Ross, over to you first.
So I always come at the building angle, and a lot of people, they'll buy their first property, as this chap's going to, and he'll think about his landlord's insurance, and he'll bring his contractor in who isn't necessarily insured or hasn't got the right insurance. Please check their insurance, because you are in their hands. When they start refurbing, the property is in their hands. And whilst landlord's insurance will cover you for some things, if he floods the place, destroys it, burns it down, you're going to have a competition on your hands with your insurer. So please make sure he's got correct, or she has got the correct insurance in place.
Yeah, I mean, that's great. That's good, yeah, to know, because people don't often check about, the contractor's insurance. That's a good point. Another nugget there. But I was going to add, just be basically open and upfront with the insurer. So whenever I adjust my policy, for example, if it's going to be vacant, you just basically ring them up and the insurance company adjusts it and then adjusts the premium to match whatever cover you need. So I mean, the NRLA do have a landlord insurance. So yeah, you basically just tell them what you're doing, what stage you're at, and they'll just flex the insurance to, as per your circumstances. Simon?
Just worth highlighting, we know very little about this set of circumstances, but it sounds potentially like this person might be taking out a buy-to-let mortgage and carrying out some works to the property. Be very careful. The reason being that potentially your insurance is void against work causing issues and damage and burning the building down at its worst case scenario if you're in breach of your mortgage conditions. And I don't believe your lender will know that you're carrying out works to the building, or you might be able to. There are a few lenders that will allow you to do it, but please do be very, very careful. It's very often not thought about, and it is an extremely unlikely set of circumstances, but it can happen. So you need to get your lender's permission to carry out those works. And generally, if you can carry out those works inside 30 days, they might allow you to do it, but just check, because your insurance might not be valid.
Okay, and the other point that the question raises is it's a very high quote he's got. So he's clearly told them that the property is going to be empty, and an empty property tips into very high risk for insurance. So what you need to be very clear at it is, how long is it going to be empty for? What's the refurbishment going to be? And to what extent are you going to be, refurbishing it? So again, as Teresa said, you need to speak to a broker, be really honest. Those quotes look very, very high to me. So I'm always happy if somebody wants to come to me, I'll put you in touch with my broker. And I've already put this question to him. So he said that looks high, but again, he doesn't know the details. So if anyone wants a bit more information, wants to speak to my broker, I'm more than happy to share. Cheers.
Perfect, Tim.
On this subject, I think, yes, absolutely make sure you have full insurance, but it raises another issue really, and that's, I'm always amazed in the property community how regularly the same kind of questions come up. Do I really need X, Y, and Z? I think sometimes the entrepreneurs like us get excited by the deal, and actually other stuff just seems like paperwork. It's not. So something like insurance, don't cut corners. Surveys, I can't believe some people go ahead sometimes without a survey or say, do I need a survey? Don't cut corners. And contracts. The idea of people saying, oh, I need a shareholders agreement to enter into my JV partner. Can anybody got a copy? Absolute madness. You need these things bespoke. So I think in general, for anybody else who's getting into property, these are not tedious bits of admin. These are not overpriced bits of unnecessary kit. Actually, these are all absolutely essential. And if you don't have them, it can be very, very disastrous for you.
Absolutely nuggets of gold.
Teresa's gone on holiday.
Perfect for that. Do you know what else doesn't cut corners? Circles. Right, let's move on from that. Someone's asked a question this is from Dawn, who's asked about EPCs, and I have to be honest, it's one of those questions that we've been asked several times over. So what I've done for you all is Ross had started this whole nuggets of gold on this show, talking about EPCs and stuff like that. So we're not going to repeat that question because I think we've done that to death. So what I've done for you all is I put couple of links on there for the EPC video, short videos we've done on this session already, and a video where we talked about energy as well, how to combat energy. I don't think we could talk about that anymore, to be honest. We're not going to be adding any value, so we'll move on from that. But Erica's asked a question, buying a HMO, I'm going to extend to make it bigger. I'm trying to decide between a 2-year and a 5-year fixed mortgage for a purchase. A 2-year would allow us to remortgage to withdraw capital sooner, but with rates rising. The 5-year is a safer option. What do you think? And I think the 5-year must be a fixed, by the way that they phrased it. But Simon, I mean, if someone's going to be, buying a property, then refinancing it, is it better not to go for a shorter term?
I guess we're kind of covering almost the same point a little bit, in that it sounds as if we don't know for sure, but it sounds as if this person is carrying out reasonably significant works to extend and enhance the value of the property, which technically your T's and C's of your mortgage will say that you are not supposed to do. So it's hard for us as an investment expert panel here to endorse doing that, but I do understand it happens. This is not in any way advice, and I cannot recommend that people do it, but it does happen. If you insist on taking out a buy-to-let mortgage and carrying out works, you should ask the lender for permission, because you are altering their security. And technically, when you start work, you can potentially reduce the value of the property below its buy price, as Ross will well know, at which point their loan to value covenant is breached, and they can potentially, at the very worst, call in a loan should they find out about it. So be very careful, I think, is what we're trying to say. But yeah, should you choose between a 2 and a 5-year, if you were carrying out light works, which could be considered to be in between tenancies, so kitchens, bathrooms, floor coverings and wall coverings, then potentially a 5-year fixed with a lender that will allow you to do a further advance in that 5-year fixed period gives you the flexibility of a remortgage at 2 years if you've got extra value in the property, but fixing in the rate. And 5-year rates aren't much different to 2-year rates currently. But please do check that the works you're carrying out are acceptable to the lender before you commit.
I quite often get this sort of question to me on a regular basis, because fixing rates gives you certainty, doesn't it? So, and people are like, oh, should I do 2 years, 5 years? I even came across someone the other day, 10 years. I think that might have been residential though. Sorry, Simon. Yeah. So I think, it's a personal thing. So forget that this person might be extending, but if you've got a choice, you've got to say, well, do I want certainty for 2 years and see what happens to interest rates? Or do I want certainty for longer? And the length of time it's taking to refinance properties at the moment, my personal choice is 2 years. It's like, by the time I've, had 1 year, I've got to start applying for the next one because I want to be ready for that. So that's my personal. I don't know what other people are doing with their rates in the panel. Nothing, obviously.
Stone silence on that one. Tim, I think you've got this thing.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to say. Certainly, I'd always go for 5. A number of reasons. First of all, actually, the time, it takes enormous time doing these things. And frankly, I've got too much time to want to do this again and again and again. That's number one. But secondly, I'm always the nerd who keeps an eye on the bigger picture, the economist, these kind of things. And I'm a firm believer that interest rates are going to be rising. I think all the indications are that in the next 5 to 7 years, interest rates will go up. They won't go up enormously like perhaps I remember in the 1980s when they were 15%. Yes, guys, 15%. They're going to go up there, but they are going to go up and then possibly come down again. But certainly, I think all the serious experts at the moment, and no one's crystal ball is perfect, but my understanding, I'm sure Simon will correct me if I'm wrong, that the expectations are Bank of England are going to probably rise again. America's going to rise again. So in the short term, they'll go up and at some stage come down again. Any more than that, I wouldn't say. So I'd always go fixed, and I'd always go 5 years.
And remember, folks, what goes up must come down, as Super Polyester might have said years ago. Oh, the young people will never get that. John has asked a question. Holiday let owners, do you provide Netflix account or find most guests have their own accounts anyway? Bear in mind, we're all moving to mobile viewing of TV channels. Therefore, a smart TV and free Wi-Fi, is it good enough? So I guess smart TV allows you to access your own Netflix and so on. Funny enough, I've done this in a property where I've provided them with everything, and they said, "Well, I don't want you charging me for it because I have my own accounts." And I felt I was doing lots of value-added stuff by doing all this kind of quirky stuff, and they've dismissed it outside. So, Bronwen, what do you do with your properties nowadays?
Well, it's very much dependent on the sort of tenants that you're going to be having and expectations, and also what the competition is doing. But certainly I would actually go and ask some of my tenants in some of my properties and say to them, look, you know, what do you think would be a good thing to have that you haven't got at the moment within reason? And really that communication with tenants is so important. So no, I don't provide Netflix at all. And I remember we were providing Sky Television like 5-6 years ago, and people said, I don't want Sky. But in my other property in Portsmouth, that I got extra £50 a month because people wanted Sky. So you've got to ask the question, have it available in some properties that you think, you know, this is going to make a difference for some people. And see what difference it makes, and are people prepared to pay, you know, just a little bit more? It was certainly in Portsmouth they did.
I think horses for courses, isn't it, really, on that one? But I think back to Bronwen's point, ask the customer, basically. Rich has asked a question. My London home has a mortgage of 340,000 and a value of circa 800,000. I'm in a fixed 5-year currently. What's the penalty if I take further advance or sell the property? So this is a residential property, or I suspect, or it could be a buy-to-let for that matter, but it just says home mortgage. If they've got a home mortgage and then sell the property, there must be a redemption penalty. But there's no redemption penalty, surely, if you're extending your loan to get more money out? Is there some?
No, it certainly sounds like a residential mortgage. Most residential mortgage lenders out there will allow you to do a further advance within the fixed term with no penalties. You'll pay a small, if anything, arrangement fee. If you haven't nudged the loan to value much above 60%, they'll probably do a desktop valuation, so you won't even need to have a physical valuation take place. And it will be based on affordability. Yeah.
Well, staying with you actually, Simon, because there's a couple of questions. Last month it was all Ross, and now it seems to be all you here. So you're gonna have to get your own hashtag. You can't have nuggets of gold. That is definitely Ross's now.
No.
So you're gonna have to think about it. But Andy's asked a question. I'm looking to release equity from my own property, so a similar situation here. Can anyone clarify and recommend if I'm interested in purchasing commercial property with an investment fund? Do I need a commercial mortgage broker to help with the equity release? Then secondly, I've heard about this second charge, but what is a second charge? So let's start with that one, Simon, because that's an interesting one.
Okay, well, first of all, if they're raising any debt against their main residence, they need a residential mortgage broker. I would highlight that I don't do residential mortgages myself, although I have an expert that I can refer people to do that. I'm a firm believer that you need to be an expert in the field that you operate in. And specialist commercial broking is my area of expertise, recycling people's cash, getting buy-to-let mortgages, limited company mortgages, etc. The second sort of question or answer to that is no, the commercial broker doesn't need to be involved in the residential side. That is a completely separate transaction that can be dealt with an average high street broker. The commercial property absolutely does need a specialism for sure. Because it's not, if it's a residential broker, they will be kind of feeling their way around in the dark with commercial mortgages, quite frankly. It's a bit of a minefield, which is why I love it. Yeah, for sure. And they've also mentioned second charge, I think, as well, didn't they?
I was just about to say, yeah, there was one about second charge. What is a second charge, and can you have that on that type of properties?
Okay, well, so we're talking about a second charge. Are we on the commercial property or a second charge on their main residence?
I would go on the basis of the commercial mortgage.
Okay. Yes, however, it's hard to understand why you would want the second charge. If you've got a new commercial mortgage and you've taken it to the maximum loan to value of 75% loan to value, a second charge lender is not going to lend you any more money, because they will be looking for you to be geared less than 75% loan to value and take you probably to a combined maximum of 75, first charge and second charge. So it would probably make sense for the first charge to go all the way to 75%. That will be the most cost-effective way, I would have thought. Again, please do reach out individually, personal message myself, so that I can kind of run through the numbers in a more sort of formal fashion. But yeah, informally, without any particular advice, yes, you can, but it seems unlikely that you would need it. If you wanted a second charge on your main res, yes, you can. If you're using it for onward property purchase, that is considered to be maybe business circumstances and can potentially be arranged by a commercial broker.
And I think Evie Bell was just coming on to that. Evie Bell said, can I own both residential and mixed use properties? So an element of residential and commercial as well. Does that affect your borrowing capabilities?
Oof, okay. I am going to have to come up with a hashtag, aren't I, guys?
Would you like to have a sit down after this one, Simon?
I will have to. Yeah, lie down. Blimey. Okay, it sounds like there's an awful lot of questions in one question there.
No, different questions. Different questions. They're different people. I'm just trying to I'll put you under pressure, and I can tell that you're beginning to loosen your collar a little bit here.
Okay. So can you get funding for both? Yes, you can. So you could have a mixed use property that has got commercial on the ground floor and residential, flats on the uppers, as we would call them. So first and second floor, maybe a flats, and that's a semi-commercial mortgage. If it's just commercial that you're getting, then you're having a completely commercial mortgage. And can you own both types of property in the same portfolio? Yes. There's possibly a use case scenario where you might get some tax advice, where you potentially would hold the commercial property in one SPV and the residential buy-to-lets in another SPV, so that you have some flexibility.
SPV, special purpose vehicle. Very good.
There you go.
So there's a special limited company where if you're doing a project and you want it standalone, you want it just for that property, you create a limited company for that purpose. Come on to that later.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I think that covers it, Simon, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah, you can have a lie down now. So we'll move over to, again, if you are watching this live, make sure that you do post your questions live, and we will try and get to you this evening. We've got Kinoski online. So good evening. This is on from YouTube. Hello. Me and my 3 friends are planning to start joint venture to buy property every 5 months with our names in the property. How does the lenders treat our mortgage? So before I move back to you, Simon, because I know that you need to take some Valium. Tim, if I can ask you to come on and talk about joint ventures, working with your 3 friends, because I've seen families fall out with one another in terms of joint ventures. I've done a series of videos about joint ventures as well. What's your take of what people should be doing before they jump into this kind of relationship?
Well, I think there are two things. First of all, it's due diligence. Now, if you know them really well, it might not be quite so difficult. But if you don't know them that well, you'd be amazed. Sometimes people don't always give an accurate view of their assets, etc. So from that point of view, people talk a lot about due diligence, finding out what they're really like. We actually have a free due diligence checklist that's available, which I can put a link on. So number one, unless they're really, really, really good friends, I would always double check and make sure you really know what they're about. But regardless of whether or not they're friends or family, or whether you've known them since you were kids, it's really important to put things in writing. And I think a lot of people don't do this. They assume, oh, we're mates, it's family, we don't really need anything else, everything will be fine. Now the problem is, as soon as you enter into a limited company with more than two people, or rather, with more than one person, with two or more, there are all sorts of issues that you need to look at. And so therefore I would strongly advise anybody who's setting up a limited company with more than one person to get a shareholders agreement, which specifically sets out how you want your company to be run. If you don't do that, then the Companies Act takes priority, and some white guys back in 1890 are telling you how to run your company. And that's particularly important if there are friends involved, for example, because what happens, there's a deadlock. And I've seen a very good example where two people who are highly experienced, really should have known better, would normally have contracts, and they didn't, and had all sorts of problems when suddenly a few years later one wanted to sell and one didn't. There was a problem, a deadlock. So therefore, number one, make sure you really, 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 really know who you get into bed with. Make sure your roles are clear. And secondly, make sure that's fully set out. And one advantage of going through a shareholders agreement is that you have to ask those questions. So actually you need to think, what happens if things fall out? What happens if we do this? What happens in that circumstance? Who will do this? Who can sign that? And so they're the two things. Due diligence, do your due diligence, and get a shareholders agreement.
Simon, any views on the mortgages of 5 friends or more working together? Well, 3 friends here in this case.
3 friends. So a lot of lenders have 4 applicants as a maximum. So you're potentially going to limit some lenders that you can go to if you've done more than 4. I kind of echo Tim there a bit. With funding and finance, one of the first things I say to somebody, let's start with the end in mind. Where are you looking to get to with this property? Where's its value going to be, and what you're going to, how are we going to get there? You would do the same with your partnership, which is okay. Where start with the end in mind. It's going to end at some point in the future. That is almost certain. You're not going to be wedded together with this property company for the next 10, 20 years. So start with how it's going to break and end, and how you're going to separate, and that will then enable you to kind of work it back on down. But in terms of lending, it doesn't. There are enough lenders out there that will work with 3 applicants for sure. Generally, you'll be required to have, if you're a director, more than 25% shareholding as well. Although that's not with every lender. And you can potentially structure the share ownership as well, as Simon will well talk to you about in terms of tax planning.
Bronwen,
I've done a lot of joint ventures in my time because I love working with experts, don't I? So a couple of things on JVs. Firstly, always pull together a heads of terms. And a heads of terms sounds, very complicated. All it is some bullet points saying, what are we agreeing to here? Just in plain English. And then together between you and the other parties, could be one, it could be more than one, you want to say, what happens if I need my money back quickly? What happens if one of us gets run over by a bus? What happens if the project is delayed? And just go through, brainstorm it together, because this is where it falls down, because people go, oh no, it's all going to be wonderful and we all know what we're doing, don't we? I can tell you now that I've worked with some great experts. But things change. Things change in the short term, they change in the long term, and people change. And so you've got to be really open and honest right from the start. And if you can get a heads of terms drawn up, it means that if you want a solicitor to do something, you've done half the job for them already, and they'll charge you less because you've already done the complexity of it. But if anybody wants to talk to me about JVs, I've got an amazing webinar on the subject. So if anyone's venturing into that area, please get some education, because it saves you a lot of heartache in the long run.
It sure does. And by the way, heads of terms is not the same thing as head, shoulders, knees and toes. Okay, just so you're clear on that. Helen has asked a question. We have developed a property. It was separate, brick barn used as our office on the same site as our home, with its own entrance, etc., completely independent, which is great for stamp duty land tax purposes. I won't go into that right now, but it says here, intended to sell, but it proving difficult as it has no garden space, just parking spaces. It is in a conservation area and curtilage listed. The property development property is in our personal names, no finance on it. What are the tax benefits as running it as a service accommodation over standard let? Please now considering these options. And that's a really interesting one, because the one thing here, what you're saying is it has no finance on it, which you're not going to be subject to the horrible taxation of Section 24 mortgage interest relief cap, which prevents you from offsetting 100% of your mortgage interest costs against your income. You're not in that boat. But what the boat you are in is capital allowances. You can, if you use it as service accommodation, and you've also got offices, which it sounds like you have, then why aren't you getting capital allowances if you haven't done so already? Especially not just on the office itself, but also on the holiday let as well, because it can really give you a significant tax write-off, circa 30% of the property purchase value. So do get a survey done. We do an awful lot of capital allowances claims with our clients. So feel free to get in contact with us, and I'll try and provide you with a link as well, so you can have a look at that in a bit more detail. Hopefully that's answered your question. Logan has asked a question. I need to increase my rent on my HMOs. What's the process I need to go through? Notice given, etc. Teresa and Bronwen, that over to you on this. I mean, from a legislation perspective and tenants' rights, etc. Teresa, you are probably more fitted, but actually, Bronwen, from a commercial perspective, you've got some insights as well. So over to you, ladies.
Well, basically, it's all about what's in the contract. So you basically need to refer back to, what agreement you've got in place with your tenant. There may well be a clause in there which states the terms as to how you will increase the rent. I know that I put a clause in that the rent will be increased annually. You don't have to give an amount that you're going to increase it, but you can say that you are going to increase it. If that isn't in the contract, then you can issue a form to them. It's a Section 13, commonly known as a Form 4, very excitingly. So you can increase the rent that way. To make things tidy, if you've got a tenant that you trust and is going to be fine in your property going forward, you could set up a new tenancy agreement with the new rent that you have set. That sort of tidies it up and makes it clear. But yes, a few options there.
Yeah, I think I have agents manage them, but I've certainly heard of the sort of fair rent clause, giving sufficient notice of rent increases. It's very topical at the moment because of utilities. For us, HMO, houses of multiple occupation houses. So when you have a shared house, then you tend to include the bills in the rent. So it's a per room rent. And that's great for people who want to share, because it just makes it so easy. But now utility bills are going to be very much more expensive. Then we have to reflect that a little bit on the rents. So I think this is really topical. I think, anybody needs to understand what's fair and what also is happening in the area. So get into that network group, go to a PIN meeting, find other landlords, talk to each other, find out what, who the experts are in your area and what other people are doing. People are happy to share.
Yeah, because you don't want to be increasing the rent and putting yourself in a situation where the tenant can't pay it. Yeah. So like you say, you have to do your market research. You have to know your tenants, what they can afford. Yeah.
And remember, ladies and gentlemen, if you're not sure about your tenants, then make sure you stalk them, as Teresa said at the beginning of this show.
No, as Simon said, Simon.
Please rewind And you'll see Teresa talk about how she wears a rain mac with a
And
camera.
I definitely didn't talk about a rubber rain mac.
It's certainly a picture you've got to have in your own mind, that's for sure. So Teresa in a rain mac in the dark night. So Mary's asked a question here. I have a couple of buy-to-lets, no more cash to continue buying. What choices have I got to try and continue growing my portfolio? Apart from robbing banks, what's your views about that, Bronwen?
Well, no matter where you start and how much money you start with, if you're seriously wanting to become an investor, then you will run out of money. And most amateurs run out of money and go, oh, yippee, I've got 2 buy-to-lets. I'll wait until I've earned enough for the next deposit. And we all know that there are other ways. So it's a great question. Thank you very much, Mary, because the important thing is understanding how can I fund different things. So Simon could pop in as well and go, right, there may be ways to raise funding from your home, etc. I'm going to save that for, we haven't given him a hashtag yet, but we will work something out. So the other way that I'm very experienced in is finding investors, private investors, people who've got money sitting in a bank or stocks and shares, and they're thinking, I'm not very happy with the return that I'm getting. But they perhaps don't want to be doing property investing themselves. They don't want to learn about it. So if you can say, look, I've got some expertise in this, here's some examples of what I've done. And if somebody says, look, I'd be happy to lend you some money, then, it's a win-win because they're going to get a better return. And I'm not talking about double digit. I'm talking about, people generally happy to get 3, 4, 5% per annum on their funds, on their money in their savings. So what you can do as an investor is you can borrow from somebody and give them a return. You can borrow for a project, you can borrow for cash flow purposes, but as an investor, you must be very, very clear how you're going to repay that loan. Okay, so that's again, education, understanding how do I do that? And then there's things like the joint venture situation. So you can borrow from somebody on a JV where they leave the money in and they get a share of the profit. So you've got the expertise, they bring the money, it's a win-win, and then they get a share of the profit or the loss. And don't forget, sometimes it could be loss-making, in which case you share the loss. So very different situation, JV versus a loan. So there are plenty of ways. Let's move on to Simon to talk about how can you raise money from your home, maybe.
Well, yeah, absolutely. A little nugget of gold there. I'm reminded of the Pet Shop Boys, yeah. And you bring the brains, I bring the money. Let's get together and make lots of money. That's kind of how a JV works, isn't it? Pulling on those 2 streams, I guess. Yeah, I guess if you've owned those buy-to-lets for a little while, it's certainly worth looking. The property market has been moving on really quickly. Annual growth in most areas of the country has hit double digits over the last 12 months. So it would be safe to assume that you've probably got some equity that you can release and unlock from properties you already own. Chances are that there'll be a decent amount there. Will it be enough for a new property? Maybe, maybe not. Who knows? But I'm going to link in strongly to getting an education, working out how to promote yourself as an investor to others, to maybe go out and do what Bronwen's suggesting. And the greatest or best way to do that is to get an education. And I can't think of anyone better. I know I'm going to blatantly plug you, Bronwen, but your courses are full of detail, really affordable. Anyone on the call tonight should really look at them in great detail. If that's something you're looking to do, you can't go anywhere better, quite frankly.
Well, what's affordable, So I'm just going to say, look, we're talking £600.
Right.
Sometimes you might get a discount if you watch my free webinar. So, we're talking very little amounts compared to what you're going to learn to make a much better return and a safer return because you're reducing your risks. Anyway, coming back to the question, anyone else in the panel? Because I know some people are a little bit anxious. Oh, should I take equity out of my home? That's my nest egg. Is that a bit risky? Again, it's about why are you trying to do what you're doing? Is it worthwhile? Increasing your debt, using the leverage, I know that's a very American word, but the leverage that debt can give you, and mortgages being relatively cheap compared to credit cards and other things, you know, to get a return and a monthly cash flow. So it's personal, it's about risk. Anyone else want to pop in with a view?
Just on that. Oh, sorry, Tim, go on. You go.
I was just saying, I'm with you. If you want somebody else to say, yeah, you know, I can't remember what my rate is on my mortgage, but it's under 2%. And yet, if you're borrowing kind of on a commercial loan, it's probably over 4, roughly 4-ish or something. So it makes sense. So yeah, I increased my residential mortgage as hard as I could, so I had some cash to carry on with the properties. And I've also borrowed from family. The first time I gave them a pretty decent rate, and having established that, I've now borrowed at a lower rate from them, and they're very happy because they're getting 0. whatever percent of the bank, and then they're getting 4% from me. They're happy. So you know, everyone's a winner.
Yeah, I was going to pretty much say the same thing. To be fair, Tim, I talk about hashtags. I was thinking one for myself, which is Tax Comedy Central, but then I just thought Jimmy Carr's already had that. Because he likes a bit of HMRC, doesn't he? So I can't think of anything else from there. So we need to move on, really, from that question. So let's go on to D. D has asked a question. Does anyone know anything about heat source pumps? Over to you, Ross. Asking for my own house, not a rental, as I need a new. Not a rental, as I need a new boiler, and was considering an aircon too. But I've heard heat source pumps can do both. I've also heard they're not great in cold weather. Any advice? So Ross, over to you.
At last, decent question.
Nuggets of gold.
So air source heat pumps, they're great. They're a great idea. They're quite a high user of electricity, because when they can't extract the heat out of the air, they use a big electrical heater element to bring it. They're also very, very expensive at the moment. They're still not viable in today's world. I was listening to a program on Radio 4, which is a bit sad, but they were very honest about air source heat pumps, and you know, throughout the country, they're not really viable yet. So go get yourself a really good high efficiency boiler, 97% plus in this day and age. There are the market leaders, which I won't mention, but they're the ones that your plumber will want to sell you. They are the biggest branded ones. And they're great. They'll go on for 10, 15, 20 years if you look after them. But in the perfect world, we'd all have solar panels, photovoltaics, if you know the technical word for them, which is the electricity generating ones. You'd have heat collectors, which is where your hot water goes through there, and in the sun they warm up, like a bit like you see on holiday. If you go to Spain and places, you'll see cylinders on the roof. We'd have an air source heat pump, and we'd also have a better way of generating electricity in this country, because your EPC will go crashing down the more electricity you use. As I said last month, energy in this country is still mainly generated by fossil fuels, gas, in some instances coal, and that will just kill your EPC rating. So I'd love to say, let's go grab a heat pump. There are grants out there if you can find them, if you can get one. You'd be very, very lucky. I haven't heard of anybody actually getting one, because the money they're given is pitiful to the demand. And you'll be paying, I would suggest, between 3 and 4 times what you'll pay for a domestic boiler, because a heat pump isn't just a case of buying a heat pump and bolting it to your side of your house. It has to be plumbed in differently. It works differently. And the other part of the question was, how efficient are they? They're meant to be efficient down to -10, but when you start getting below 10 degrees, you're using more electricity to generate your heat than you are the air that they're extracting the heat from. So still not the perfect solution. I don't think the perfect solution's out there. Go on and find that. I think Simon's put the list up of things I suggested last time, practical steps to go around your own home, your HMOs, your buy-to-lets if you're paying for the bills, and just go through those 10 steps, and you should see your energy usage come down if you do it properly. And again, I always say this, if you're going to go insulate in your own home or your rental properties, be really careful on what you put in your cavity walls. If your house is circa 1900 or before, don't bother.
And don't forget, people, but if you are out next to a lamppost, you can actually get free electricity by connecting your house through to the lamppost itself. So save yourself a bit of money and get a lamppost. GP has asked a question: what are the ballpark figures for loan to value interest rates and fees for loan on a purely commercial unit? Again, mixed use. I mean, we were getting a lot of questions about mixed use and commercial properties there this evening. We've got a few people on YouTube even saying the same thing. What is cheaper, mixed use properties, commercial, residential? Give us a flavour. I know you can't pin it, but give us a flavour.
Okay, so the cheapest interest rates in the marketplace are going to be on residential properties. So that's buy-to-lets or properties that you live in yourself. Typically, if it's in your personal name, the rate might start with a 1. On a 2-year product, it might start with a 2. With a 5-year product, if you put it into a limited company, then you'll be looking at a 2-year product starting with a 2, and you'll be looking at a 5-year product that would be high 2s. We then move on to HMOs. You'll then be in the ballpark of 3%, and we then go on to semi-commercial. You're looking then at properties that sit within the 4% regions. This is for 5-year money I'm talking about. And if you're then talking about fully commercial, chances are most lenders with a higher loan to value, 65 or 75% loan to value, you're going to be in the 5s, 5 to 5.5 typically. It's harder to get 75% loan to value on a full commercial property. And depending on what that commercial property is, might also then have certain other restrictions. So if it's been an area that's been massively affected by COVID, the lenders are still quite hesitant lending into that kind of market space. Yeah, that's a very broad brush for GP. GP, if you need more information, reach out.
Yeah. So Simon, maybe there's something else here in terms of experience, because a lot of people learning with me are just starting out. They have no knowledge whatsoever. So if somebody's talking about, oh, it's mixed use or even HMO, is that possible for someone starting out to go straight into something like that?
Yeah, okay, good question. Absolutely brilliant question. Yeah, so if you were going, just starting out, to go straight into an HMO, there's definitely a reduced pool of lenders that will do that. But there are some lenders out there that will be able to cope with it. If you're going straight into semi-commercial, that's very difficult to do. There's a few lenders out there that will cater for it, and they'll charge a slightly higher premium for you to do it. But the idea is, with a buy-to-let, if you need a new tenant, there are people queuing around the corner to take that tenancy. With a commercial property, it's not uncommon for them to be empty for 6 to 9 months between tenants, because it's quite a specialised area. So lenders typically will want you to have a minimum of 12, sometimes 24 months worth of experience of 1 or 2 buy-to-lets before you can move on to that. But there are ways around it. There are ways I can kind of cut corners, if you like, find lenders that will accept certain things, or you can present a deal in a certain way by finding out the merits of the borrower and the security in a way that will allow the lender to get more comfortable than their stated black and white criteria might suggest.
And let me just, this is not marketing. However, if you are learning with an expert and you have knowledge through good education, the conversation is so much easier to have because you know the language and you start to talk about exit plans and what happens if, and the fact that you understand multiples and the commercial market. So, don't take risks, jumping into something just because on social media it seems to be everyone's talking about it. No, keep it simple is my mantra.
Absolutely. Actually, I haven't mentioned this, but in some circumstances, I can use people's property education as part of experience to build a picture up to get them lending with certain lenders. It's a no-brainer, isn't it, really?
Questions of gold, I'm calling those.
Right, moving on, because there are plenty of questions to get through tonight, and we are quickly running out of time. Would you believe it's already 9:10? Someone's asked a question online. This is on YouTube, asking the question about can you buy the limited company as opposed to buying a property that is currently in the limited company? And the answer is yes, you can. But what you have to think about is You might be saving on stamp duty land tax because you are not buying the property. You are actually buying the company, which means you're paying stamp duty at 0.5%, not the transaction cost, so the property, the company value, which is significantly cheaper than stamp duty land tax. But what you are also doing is buying the company. You do not know, without doing good due diligence, what you are buying in that limited company. There may be all sorts of legal connotations. The company might be being sued by the tenant, and you might not know about it for several years later down the line. So you might have to be quite careful about buying the limited company. But you could do due diligence, by the way. You can get people to do all this kind of work for you. It will cost you about £2,000 to £5,000, depending on the company that does the due diligence. We don't do that type of work because it's very much forensic based. So they'll go through the debtors, the creditors of that company, and then go through all of that credit checks and reports and whatever. We are not equipped to do that. We are property tax specialists, so we stay away from that. But Simon, from your point of view, if a limited company has got a mortgage on a property, and then someone else comes along and says, I want to buy the company, how easy is it to do that, to buy the company that already has a mortgage in place?
Very dependent on who that lender is. A lot of lenders don't like transfer of share ownership across because of that very reason that you just mentioned. If something crops up legally in the future, let's say for argument's sake, and Ross, we'll throw this over as a nugget of gold to you, Ross. I had to get that in there. If works have been done on the property in the past, and let's say it had some asbestos and there wasn't an asbestos survey, potentially that company is liable because they employed that contractor. And if I don't misunderstand this, but Ross, tell me if I'm wrong here, but if there were incorrect insurances for that contractor on site, it then becomes the person who contracted them to do the work's responsibility for anything that's gone wrong.
That's a question,
isn't it? Just
it depends on the size of project. I mean, asbestos is probably a good one to talk about, but not. I mean, I could go on about asbestos for hours. You will find it in all properties. There's so much legislation around it. You shouldn't remove it unless you know what it is, and then you should get a registered contractor to come and remove it, and that will come with some form of certification and the right insurances. So really, I mean, asbestos is a whole. I could sit here for an hour and talk about asbestos.
You must be a hoot to be out with. I mean, people talk about holidays and buying a new car. Let me tell you about my asbestos.
Well, I can tell you about my day-to-day, Simon, which involved something else, which wasn't very nice.
We won't be talking about toilet breaks here.
No,
there is a question here actually for you. Talk about boilers. And we're not talking about my wife. So a boiler question here is, boiler question please. If I'm buying a property that has a coal fire, do you think this will qualify for a boiler grant? I'm going to go away now and get murdered. But if you can answer that question, that'd be fantastic.
I can't. I would Google it. I've never heard of that. No.
Let's not stress you out. Paul Young has asked a question. Yeah, come back to me if you can. Paul Young has asked the question, is the lender wants an intrusive investigation. Again, it reminds me of the rubber glove comment that we made earlier. To reveal reasons for cracking to wall in stairway and slope to the floor. How should I go about breaking into walls and floors in the vendor's house? Well, don't. It would be the answer. But I mean, Ross, from a serious point of view, if there's serious considerations, what should you do here?
Structural engineer for that one. I wouldn't bother with the surveyor. I'd go straight for a structural engineer. There's plenty of them around. Have a word with the local builder if you've got one, if you use a builder. But yeah, get a structural engineer, get him to come round. Difficult to say a price. They're not that expensive for an initial view, and then they'll want more money to go into deeper reports like all professional people will. But yeah, an initial view from a structural engineer would be your first port of call.
That's good. Right, I'm going to go to another question now as well.
Simon had a view.
Simon, you've got your hand up, sorry.
Yeah, it's safe to assume that any underwriter is almost certainly going to ask for that structural engineer's report. Any other report won't hold weight in terms of lending. So yeah, Ross is bang on there. Another nugget of gold, unbelievably.
Teresa.
Sorry, I want to backtrack slightly, because did you mention about heat pumps? What was the comment about heat pumps?
Yes, we did. It was heat pumps, not other types of pumps.
Right, yeah, because there is, I've just popped it in the chat. Apparently there is a boiler upgrade scheme for heat pumps. Grants up to
we're on the
5,000.
grants. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, is there?
Question.
Okay. Did you put that in the chat? Have you?
Yeah.
Nothing has come through. So if you could send that through to me again, then I'll put that in the chat box. That'd be fantastic. Oh, did you put it through the YouTube one?
Yeah. I've just popped it in our chat though.
Multitasking.
Sneaky devil,
That's
you. I didn't even
impressive.
see it. Swept that one in.
Cool.
That's good to see. That's good to see.
Yeah.
Let's go to another question.
Sorry, Simon, can I just jump in on that? Because
No.
okay, I'm aware of that, but
If you're in a sack race, yeah. Of course
if you actually look at it, it says it's planned from April. There's been no guarantees on it, and the money I was told that was being set aside for it, it won't cover. I mean, individuals, if you can get it, if you can actually be successful in your application, then great. But there's nowhere near enough money to cater for the amount of people that are actually going to be demanding air source heat pumps.
Teresa, here's a question from, Janet has asked a question for you there, Teresa. What's the new changes in right to rent legislation coming in April?
All right, this is just about, it's all about the digitalisation of the process. So at the start of the pandemic, they basically allowed landlords to do right to rent checks online. So you didn't have to physically, meet the person. You could do it all sort of virtually. So they're basically extending that. They're extending that process until September. And they're saying, there's no retrospective checks required. Let's say, for example, we get to September and they say you have to go back face to face. You don't have to go back and then meet all the people that you did checks on virtually. And also there was a digital service for people who were coming in on visas, like sort of temporary residents or people holidaying here, what have you, visitors. So you were able to check with the Home Office digitally on those people. And they've also extended that now from April, that you can check British and Irish citizens digitally as well. And they're saying that with for those holding a biometric card, that is only digital now. So it's all about, moving things virtually, isn't it? So
very good point. I'm just going to go to a question here, which is about mortgages. There's a couple of more mortgage questions for you, Simon. I hope you're okay, because I know that you got a bit hot under the cover there. So the question here for you is, Bart has asked a question. I haven't raised a mortgage for 20 years. Is it normal to pay £500 up free for the broker itself? I mean, you charge 5,000, so I'm not sure what they're worrying about 500. But what is the normal broker fee?
That's not an uncommon fee. If the person providing a service is providing a good service, make sure that generally you would charge it maybe on decision in principle or offer. But yeah, yes, that's not uncommon. I guess if there's problems with getting the mortgage, they're not going to recharge you it for the next application. If the recommendation that they've made doesn't stick, they should also be going out to find you another mortgage. Yes, Bart. It's about right.
You don't. Yeah. That's all they need to know.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on. That's it, nice and easy. Someone's asked a question. It's similar to these kind of questions. Someone's asked a question: can I get a mortgage if I have an unencumbered home? And jointly to that is, can I get a mortgage if I don't have a job? They're not connected, by the way, Simon, so separate questions.
Okay, unencumbered property, yes, you can raise finance against that, either short term. So if you've got a project that you can add value to, you could use the equity in your unencumbered property on a short term basis, say a bridge to let type scenario. That's that one. And the second question, Simon, was if they're going to have an income. Okay, well,
yeah.
That's a really hard one to answer. There are lenders out there with no minimum income requirements. And there are definitely ways of presenting cases to those lenders if you have no income. But to genuinely have no income is quite an uncommon thing. And a lot of people don't realise what counts as an income. You know, as long as you've got something that we can show as income to the lender, we can take that forward. Yeah, but if you actually have no provable income, there are a few lenders out there will also make that work for sure.
I think, Simon, I'm doing a job for you. I think Judy also asked, it's related to this, that she doesn't have her own house. She doesn't own her own home, so she's renting herself. Can she get a mortgage for a buy-to-let?
Yes, she can. In short, please reach out, Judy.
Yeah, that might be the easiest thing, right? Just to reach out on that one. I've got a couple other questions. Again, Simon's show tonight, isn't it? Victoria's asked questions saying, how does rent-to-rent work if the mortgage on the property is buy-to-let and the tenant on an AST tenancy wants to sublet it on Airbnb for weekends during the summer?
That's a really specialist question. A lot of this goes on where people do not change the mortgage. The current owner needs to change the mortgage, and really what they want is, one, a lender that is service accommodation friendly, and secondly is also corporate let type friendly as well. And the two of those are not that common. There's a few lenders out there that will do it, but you absolutely do need to change it for sure.
I've got another question. This is from Bart, who says, I have a HMO Portsmouth with 4 students. I'm about to refinance it to start my building my portfolio. At the moment, this is in my personal name. I have a limited company set up to buy and hold property. I also have another limited company set up, but not trading. My question is this: the property was formerly my own home, and I do not hold any other property in the UK. What, if any, is the best method to transfer the property to the limited company? And interestingly enough, if you move your property that is currently in your own name into a limited company, you don't actually pay capital gains tax, because you'll get private residency relief because you've always lived in the property. So please note though, always lived in the property, okay? So some people leave the property and there are capital gains tax issues. But there will be stamp duty and land tax issues. So I see a lot of this when people say, I'm now being affected by Section 24 mortgage interest relief cap, or I'm thinking about buying property and I could be paying lots of tax. But what you have to think about is, what is the cost of moving a property from your name into a limited company? You might have redemption penalties on mortgages. You may have tax consequences, like I said, about stamp duty, land tax. And you have to weigh those up and say, well, how long would it take me to save tax by having the property inside a limited company versus my own name? That's not something you can do in 5 minutes. And it's something that you probably need to speak to your accountant about, if I'm honest. We have regular conversations about it. And if I'm totally honest, 60% of our clients, we say to people, if you've got 1 or 2 properties, and I won't go into corporation relief, I know, Bronwen, you've done that, but for someone like this, I would say that it's case-by-case basis, but 60% of our clients that will want to transfer 1 or 2 properties out of their name into a company ends up being, don't do it, because it's just time and effort. And back to what Tim was saying, actually, it takes a long time to go through the mortgage application, go through the conveyancing process. And if you're not going to save any money for the next 10 years, what's the point? So I would always ask you to kind of do that and go through there. Ginny's asked a question. What are your thoughts on service accommodation holiday lets? Is it profitable or risky investment? And how do you counter voids during off-season periods? HMO versus service accommodation. And it's, to be honest, for me, it's a no-brainer. I'm not really into HMOs. I prefer service accommodation because there's less risk for me personally in terms of tenants. But that is only my preference. I know people like Bronwen and Tim who do own HMOs, by the way. Now I don't own any now, but Bronwen, Tim, what's your views on HMOs versus service accommodation?
Well, I think it's good to diversify. So if you're all in one sector and you don't have anything else, then, you know, I think it's good to for risk to diversify. I think if you're all in serviced accommodation, holiday letting, and COVID happened, you were panicking somewhat. So again, you've got to go, right, what if? There are lots of pros and cons. And again, I have webinars on this very topic. So I would say have both, but don't forget service accommodation is quite time intensive. And you've got to have really good systems in place if you're going to run it efficiently. Go do some due diligence, as we always say, and just check out what other service accommodation is in the area. Are you likely to get top-notch rates? And always estimate occupancy of probably, you know, 50-60% tops, and go, if I was to get occupancy at that high, is it worth my while? And finally, yes, the way we diversified was we started to take contractors. We took in people for slightly longer stays and we reduced the price. So you can be flexible. Tim, any views? You're on.
Yes, mute. I'm trying to unmute. Yes, I'm an old chap, you know, it takes me a while. Yeah, I'm with you entirely. I like spreading my risk. I think they both work well. Again, I think it depends if you've got the right property in the right area. Frankly, there are some HMOs right at the bottom end that are really struggling and will continue to struggle. And equally, mine is, you know, I spent more on doing it up than I did on buying it. And it's worked really well, but I'm about to invest in more SA. But again, like you, I like spreading the risk. Also, I think it's quite useful sometimes to have a plan B. With my block of flats, commercial conversion, I've got currently 4 as SA, 2 as ASTs. We were going to convert them over, but then of course COVID happened. And in fact, at one stage, we were going to stop doing SA entirely and let them out to the council like you did. But then actually, because we were getting contractors, we worked out we were better off still, despite COVID, with the contractors. So I think having a plan B is good. You know, spreading a risk is good. Yeah, but both are good in the circumstances if you get the right property in the right place.
I'm going to have to stop. Not just because I'm boycotting the show or I'm on strike, which is what lorry drivers are on strike in Spain at the minute. So we're waiting for deliveries, we're not getting them. But we are that time. It is now 9:30, and I do apologise if we have not got through all of your questions. I know people were saying, I've got a question. Guys, this is a free episode show and it's for an hour and a half. So
8:30. It's 9:30 with you, Simon.
Well, yes, 9:30. It's 8:30 in the UK. It's 9:30.
We're not going on till 9:30.
Hola, ¿cómo estás? Okay, so muy bien. I think it was a great show. And I have to be honest, Bronwen, I'm going to give it to you.
Yeah.
We are closing out.
Yeah, well done, everybody. What a great evening again. And if you haven't had your question answered, okay, in the link, Simon's going to put a consultation with me, free. Okay, we give so much free advice, don't we, all of us? Free half an hour with me. There's a diary link there. Book some time with me, and if I can answer it, I will do. Otherwise, we will take it forward to the next month. So the next month, I haven't even looked this up. The first Tim, I need you.
Tim's very good at this.
The first Monday in May is bank holiday. So we're going. It's a bank holiday. So we need to go. So we're going to the 9th of May. So even more time to think up the questions that you need answered. And of course, everyone's going to have an amazing Easter. One final thing, if there was anything that we talked about that you were thinking, I don't have a clue what you're talking about, SPV, mixed use, JV, what else, loan to value, just send me an email and say, I need some education. I need to know what this language is all about. And I can certainly help you there. So on that note, I think we will all say cheerio for now and have a super Easter, everybody.